Hello, I'm Max Truscott, host of the top-ranked Aviation News Talk podcast. It's a weekly show with news and tips for pilots and student pilots to keep you safe. I'm the author of several books, and I'm the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. Now, pilots need to know a lot about aerodynamics, but not everything you've been taught about lift or spins may be true. So today I'm talking with spin expert Dr. Catherine Cavagnaro in this video version of episode 155. I'll be showing many of the videos she's taken of different kinds of stalls and spins. Now, please hit subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. And here's Catherine. And now let me tell you a little bit about Catherine. She is an expert on spins, aerobatics, and upset recovery techniques. She learned from and also taught with the spin doctor and aviation author William Kirshner. He once performed 25 consecutive spins in a Cessna 152, but Catherine went on to outdo him, breaking that record by performing 60 continuous spins. She is a doctor in her own right, as she not only holds an ATP and CFI certificate, but also a PhD in mathematics. She's a professor of mathematics at the University of the South and has chaired the Department of Mathematics and Computer Science. She also served as a spin demonstration pilot at the University of Tennessee Space Institute, that's UTSI, as well as on research and flight testing teams for the aircraft icing project using the UTSI Variable Stability Navion. She makes her own videos, some of which we'll talk about here today, and those help pilots understand the complex aerodynamics of spins and unusual attitudes. In 2018, Catherine was named by the FAA as the National FAA Safety Team Representative of the Year, and this year she was honored yet again by the FAA as the 2020 National Certificated Flight Instructor of the Year, representing all the 100,000 plus CFIs in the U.S. She is a monthly contributor to AOPA Pilot Magazine and a popular presenter at AirVenture and the AOPA Regional Fly-Ins, where I've seen her speak. Catherine also serves as a designated pilot examiner, and she owns a flight school called ACE Aerobatics School that's located at the Suwannee Franklin County Airport on the campus of the University of the South. Well, Catherine, welcome to the show. It's great to talk to you again.
Thanks so much, Max. This is my favorite podcast, and I'm appreciate you having me.
We are thrilled to have you as a listener and a supporter, and you're just one of my favorite people anyway. I love your presentations, and so I'm happy that we can kind of share with everyone else, the great things that you're doing here. Let's kind of start back at the basics. I know you're involved in lots of different things, and I know that many aviation topics are kind of clouded with, myths and things like that. Let's talk about lift. Can you tell us about some of the debunked theories of lift that flight instructors still talk about, and then talk about how we think lift really works?
Sure. Yeah. So you're referring probably to the equal transit theory. And when I was a student pilot, I read in a book that if you have two air molecules that start at the beginning of the wing, that in order for them to meet up at the back of the wing, the one that goes on top has to travel farther and therefore faster. And I wrote an article several months ago for Pilot Magazine on an amazing collection of videos by Alexander Lippisch, who was an aerodynamicist who came over from Germany in the 1940s, right after World War II. And while he was working for the Collins Foundation in the 1950s, he created a bunch of smoke tunnel videos that completely debunked that theory. The fact is that the flow across the top is far greater, so that those two air molecules will never meet each other again. And lift is complicated. There's no doubt about that. But what I love about those videos is that whether you're an aerodynamicist or a student pilot, you can see what is true. And I'd call anybody's attention to those. If you're a flight instructor, I think it's an amazing resource. Last year, with a little nudging, University of Iowa actually put out all 13 episodes. So that's 6.5 hours of smoke tunnel videos out on the internet on YouTube for free. So it's just a great resource, and I hope flight instructors avail themselves of those videos.
Well, I've certainly heard that theory a lot, and yet the big theory that I hear is that it's all about money. If you don't have any money, you don't get lift. Is that what you've heard?
That's exactly true.
Yep, totally. Well, talk about the theories of lift that people believe may be true.
Sure. At the end of the day, it's that angle of attack and or the cambered surface on top that causes the flow across the top to accelerate. And it was Bernoulli years ago who noticed a connection between higher velocity air and a lower pressure environment. So you have higher velocity on top, so a lower pressure environment upstairs, higher pressure downstairs, and so you get a net force in the upward direction.
Okay, good. So let's talk about stalls. What causes stalls?
Okay. What happens as the angle of attack of the wing goes up, you'll see what happens is that there's a separation bubble at the back of the wing. And what it is the flow across the top, which at low angles of attack is nice and smooth and attached, it starts to detach near the rear part of the wing. And as the angle of attack goes up, that separation point moves forward toward the front of the wing. And you'll actually get reversed flow. They call it a separation bubble because if you look at, say, the smoke tunnel video, and if you want to put a link to that, that'd be great. There's a stall smoke tunnel video that shows that separation bubble where you actually get reverse flow across the wing. And when that separation point moves forward and envelops enough of the wing, that's when the wing has stalled. And you'll see that the flow just completely detaches. If you've ever seen videos where people have put tufting on wings, you can tell the separation bubble is over the point at which the streamers or whatever they've used, the yarn, is dancing. So those are the points where, the separation bubble is there.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to recall, do you have a video out on stalls?
I have a number of videos. So I, a few years ago, spent 3 days putting tufting all over Wilbur's wings, one of my airplanes, so that I could witness during stalls and spins exactly where that separation bubble is and exactly which parts of the wing are lifting.
And tell us who Wilbur is.
Wilbur is my Cessna 152 Aerobat, who is a clone. He's 5 serial numbers earlier than Bill Kirshner's 152 Aerobat that's now in the Smithsonian.
And what did you find from putting all the tufts of strings there, and where exactly does the reverse flow occur?
Well, it's interesting. So what I did was I wanted to examine slipping and skidding stalls. Mm-hmm. And I had a student years ago who asked me, well, in this airplane, in a spin, exactly which parts of the wings are stalled? And I actually couldn't answer that because you can't get a look at it. So that's the reason that I did that. I thought I need to be able to answer this question. And what's fascinating is that during a long spin, a developed spin in my airplane, you can see that the wing on the inside is completely stalled. The separation bubble is over the entire wing, and due to I put strings and cones at the end of the wingtip so that you could see the vortex action at the ends of the wingtip, because when a wing is lifting, it's creating a vortex. So if you don't see a vortex, it's not lifting. So on the inside part of the wing in a spin, you'll see that it's completely stalled and there's no vortex on the inside wing. Whereas the outside wing, interestingly, is also mostly stalled, but there's enough attached flow to create some lift. So you'll see that the outside wing has some lift, the inside wing has no lift, and then that's that imbalance of forces that's going to perpetuate that spinning motion.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about slipping stalls versus skidding stalls. I had watched your video when you gave a presentation, I think when we were in Frederick last year, and you made some interesting points that I wasn't fully aware of and made me realize that one of them is a heck of a lot worse than the other.
Yeah, right. So when I have a student at Sewanee, when I'm sharing spins and aerobatics with the student, I make sure that, first of all, that of course we stall. And if they'd like to warm up with some coordinated stalls, that's great. But I also make sure that we do uncoordinated stalls, because I think that What people fear about stalls the most is they seem so unpredictable. I have people call me or tell me, gosh, this wing always drops when I am in, practicing stalls. And what I like to do is take the mystery out of it. You know exactly which wing is going to drop based on the way that you're not coordinated. So, for example, if you're turning and you're giving insufficient rudder for your turn, then you are slipping. It's characterized by the ball being deflected toward the inside of your turn. And whenever you're slipping, your high wing is going to stall first and you're going to roll over the top. When you're skidding, it's the opposite. You're giving too much rudder to coordinate your turn. And when you're skidding, your lower wing has a higher angle of attack. It stalls first and you'll go under the bottom. And it's that way every time. And the reason it's so easy to have a wing drop when you're practicing stalls is that coordination is a razor thin line between, there are infinitely many ways to slip, there are infinitely many ways to skid, but there's only one way to be perfectly coordinated. So truthfully, we're almost never in perfectly coordinated flight. So if you add a stall to that, you're going to be on your way into a spin.
And so for folks who aren't able to see the video, tell us which one of those is worse and why. It's pretty obvious when you see the video.
Yeah, there's a misnomer out there about slipping, that you can't spin out of a slip. You can spin out of a slip. As I said before, your high wing is going to stall first and you're going to roll over the top so that at least you're rolling through a level flight attitude. So you have actually more, it's easier, I suppose, to recover from a spin that is occurring out of a slip, because you have more time until you're upside down. A slip is a valuable maneuver. We use it to compensate for a crosswind or losing unwanted altitude without picking up unwanted airspeed on landing. So it's a great maneuver, but if you don't watch your angle of attack, you're going to be on your way into a spin. Now, a skid, there is no virtue in a skid. There is no emergency for which a skid is somehow the answer. So we should certainly never skid in any of our flying. And unfortunately, though, people do every year, and it ends in disaster because, again, the lower wing stalls first and you're upside down sooner than you would be in a slipping stall.
Yeah, it's pretty clear from the video that by the time you can recover, boy, you're a lot closer to upside down than you would be. So you mentioned that there's no virtue in doing a skidding turn, and yet pilots seem to think there is. Tell us where in the traffic pattern they're most likely to somehow think there's some benefit to stomping on the extra rudder.
Yeah, my sense is that on the base to final turn, especially, it's exacerbated if you have a tailwind on base. So base happens sooner than it usually does. And you see yourself about to overshoot it. It can be awfully tempting to just put in a bit of that inside rudder, and it's a terrible mistake. Obviously, if it looks like you're going to be overshooting, just power up, gear up, take it around, and try for an approach that better compensates for, say, that tailwind on base. We cover that when I teach spins in aerobatics. We do that base to final spin up high so people can see what it's like. And you might come away with, gosh, I could never do this. But my own belief is that it's amazing what we can do when we are nervous, overloaded, or distracted. So, and it's unfortunate that we see it happen around the big air shows too. And I've certainly landed at Oshkosh, and you're busy. You're certainly busy with following directions, but there's never a reason not to go around if things aren't looking good.
Yeah, and I can think of two base to final spins with excess rudder, at least it appears that way, on two Cirrus crashes just in the last year, and a third one going back a little bit further than there. So, I mean, this can really happen in any airplane. And as I think back, I can remember before I became a flight instructor, there were times where I thought, oh, I'm going to overshoot this turn. I know what I'll do. I'll just make it turn faster by giving it even more right rudder. So I think it's a pretty common, intuitive, solution that people come up with. But, oh my gosh, gosh, I don't think they realize how fast they can kill themselves when they do that.
Absolutely. And I'm certainly not advocating it, but a lot of times what people do is, we're taught don't bank steeply in the pattern. And I'm certainly not advocating it. But what people do to avoid that is far worse than banking steeply. And again, just take it around if things don't look good.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I often have folks who will be very shy about banking more than 20 degrees in the traffic pattern. And well, why don't you go ahead and tell people what's the downside of these nice little shallow, gentle turns?
Well, you have a high turn radius and you have a low turn rate. So, I like making that downwind to base a healthy 30-degree bank because you're getting onto base sooner so that you can check the runway, look out to final, make sure that, when you level your wings, if you're in a high wing or a low wing, you're going to have either trouble seeing the runway or checking for final to make sure that nobody's coming straight in. So if you do a nice healthy bank onto base, it gives you the time to level your wings, check your position, check for traffic, and then plan your turn onto final.
Yeah, I agree. I'm always pushing my clients to give me a solid 30 degrees in all of the turns, because if they don't, it just increases the odds of overshooting. And if they overshoot the base to final turn, that increases the odds of them putting excess, inside rudder in, and that's a disaster.
Right. And not to geek out too much, but in a level turn, a 30-degree bank increases your stall speed by about 7%. Right. And the fact is, usually that isn't a level turn. So your stall speed isn't even going up by that much. And we're usually carrying far more than that over stall speed turning onto base.
Right. So I recall from one of your videos and one of your presentations, you were showing the video of the cones kind of spinning behind your wings as you were starting up. Tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of smashes one of the myths that we have in aviation about wake turbulence.
Yeah, when I was a student pilot, I read that when operating around other aircraft, say if I'm following in another aircraft, I should land after that airplane's touchdown point, or if I take off before the rotation point of a departing aircraft, I'm going to be okay. And there's an FAA advisory circular that says exactly that. And I just thought that didn't make any sense to me, because as long as the wing is going through the air, it's creating lift. It may not be enough lift to get off the ground, but it's still creating lift and therefore creating vortices. So I put cones and strings on the end of my wingtip to show that when an aircraft is on the takeoff roll, it is developing vortices on the ground. They certainly become stronger as the plane goes down the runway, but they're still there. So, I think trying to imagine where vortices are is it's not a recipe for success. I think there's nothing like just waiting a couple of minutes, and if the winds are particularly calm, wait more like 3 minutes between operations, and just don't even try to imagine where they are. Because the trouble is, of course, they're invisible. So it's we're left to imagine.
Yeah, and I've actually had controllers tell me when I wanted to wait, oh, you don't have to worry, because I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm the pilot. I have lots of extra, space. And so, yeah, people should never hesitate to, ask for a delay to, avoid the wake turbulence. I was really happy to see that video of yours, because when I first learned about what you just described, it didn't make sense to me for, a reason that, as I think about phenomena in nature, they're generally not digital. They're not on and then suddenly turn off. Usually they're kind of continuous. Exactly. And so to me, it made no sense at all that we suddenly go from zero wake turbulence to, instantly a huge amount. It's like, no, that doesn't sound like a natural phenomena.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about something that is probably natural to you, and that's spins. Sure. Talk a little bit about kind of the theory of spins. How do spins occur?
Sure. So basically, aerodynamically, if you combine a stall with a lack of coordination, you're on your way into a spin.
And let's talk a little bit about spin recovery, because I think some people think, oh yeah, there's a simple formula and it applies to all airplanes. What do you teach people?
Yeah, I cringe about that. Certainly, you should look at the POH of the plane that you're flying and regard that as the Bible. That is what the test pilots for the aircraft deemed the most efficient. Now, there are certain common themes among them. Interestingly, those date back to 1936. NACA, the predecessor of NASA, studied the characteristics of the military aircraft of the day, looking for an all-around recovery procedure that was good for those aircraft. Well, the military aircraft of the 1930s are exactly what you and I fly today, Max. So there are some common themes that tend to be helpful for a lot of aircraft. There's almost nothing you can say about spins that is true for every single aircraft, I suppose, except the fact that you're combining a stall with a lack of coordination. But some of the ingredients in the spin recovery for most aircraft, pulling back on the throttle is a good thing. And on CFI check rides, I ask about that, and I get sort of a crazy answer. I think people don't understand why we generally want to pull back on the power during a spin recovery. And the reason we want to do that is, they think that it is because the airplane is going to be screaming at the ground and we don't need to exacerbate that situation. But what I ask them to do is imagine, okay, you're flying your airplane and the autopilot's not on, but you have it trimmed out for cruise flight. You barely have to touch the controls. And if you reach over and pull the throttle back and then don't touch the controls, what does the airplane do? And everybody answers me correctly. They say, well, the airplane pitches down and it picks up speed. And that's exactly why we generally close the throttle during spin recoveries, because it's helping us get our nose down, which is important to also push on the yoke, because what happens is you're unstalling the wings and you are getting your lift back and you're getting your roll stability back when you do that. So generally speaking, for a lot of airplanes, pulling the power, certainly pushing. You can give rudder to help stop the rotation, but in a lot of general aviation aircraft, the rudder gets you into the spin, but it leaves you high and dry when it comes to getting out of the spin. So in some airplanes, the rudder is large enough and it has enough decent flow across it to stop the rotation, but in a number of general aviation aircraft, that's not true. So sure, give opposite rudder to help stop the rotation. And generally you want to keep your ailerons neutral, because beyond the stall, their effects can be sometimes backwards of what you hope they would be. So generally speaking, you want to keep the ailerons neutral. So those are sort of the ingredients that you'll notice in a lot of POH spin recoveries.
Sure. So the acronym that I've often heard is PARE, power, ailerons neutral, rudder full opposite, and then elevator push forward. And yet I know, for example, in the Diamond DA40, I think it's PAER. I believe. Anyway, there are two of them that are reversed from that. I don't recall if those are the correct two. Do you think that's a kind of a general thing people might try if they're not familiar with recovery for their particular aircraft?
Yeah, my hope is that they will be.
Yeah.
They will have read their spin recovery procedure. But in general, those ingredients tend to be helpful for a lot of general aviation aircraft.
So I know that, for example, in some countries, spin training is required as part of getting your pilot certificate. Here in the U.S., it's not. The parachute requirement is something that I think is confusing to folks. When do you need a parachute? When don't you need one for spin training?
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation about that. First of all, when you're in an airplane, you can do whatever you want without a parachute. It's when someone else gets in the plane, that's when the regulations apply. So any maneuver that's required for a certificate, and spins are required for the CFI certificate, then you do not need to wear parachutes for that. However, it must be an instructional flight. So it doesn't have to be anybody, by the way, working toward a CFI. So if I fly with a student pilot, which I often do, a student pilot who just wants to feel more comfortable with stalls, and there's nothing like spin training to help people understand and feel more comfortable with stalls. So we often don't wear parachutes. I leave it up to my student. Let them choose. I always keep currently packed parachutes, so I'm happy to wear them, but I'm also happy not to wear them. And I'd say 50% of people choose not to. So as long as the flight is instructional. But Max, if you and I were out flying and it was more like, hey, watch this, then we need to wear parachutes. So it needs to be in an instructional flight.
I'd love to fly with you someday, but if I hear watch this, man, I'm going to grab the controls away from you. Oh, dear. So how did you end up spinning 60 times in a row? Tell us how that came about.
So I taught with Bill Kirshner for the last few years of his life, and he had a record. He had done a 25 turn spin. And he also had an amazing background. He was a naval pilot, and in the 1950s, he was night qualified out in the Pacific. He would land Corsairs off on straight deck carriers in the Pacific at night. And I just thought, I woke up one day, I realized, I'm never going to do anything like that. So I think I need to do something that Bill has never done. And that was before I had my airplane, Wilbur. And so we were using Bill's plane to teach. And every once in a while, Bill would call me up and just say, hey, could you go out and fly my plane? And, it needs to get flown. And so I thought, here is my chance to do 26 turns. So I took his plane out. I didn't tell him, but I took his plane up way high. This is the day before ADS-B, so he wouldn't have known otherwise. So I put it into a long spin. I think I went up to 10,000 MSL and put it into a really long spin. And I'm counting the turns, 19, 20, 21, 22, and it self-recovered. And I was so upset because it took me so long to get to 10,000 feet in a Cessna 152. So I called it quits for the day. And a couple weeks later, he called me again. He says, hey, can you go fly my airplane? And so I said, oh, sure. Here's my chance again. And it self-recovered after 19 turns. And I just kind of felt, Bill was pretty competitive. I kind of felt it was like Bill was sitting next to me going, not in my airplane, So after I found Wilbur in 2006, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try it now. So I took Wilbur up and I got a 26 turn spin in. And then I thought, well, gosh, that was actually kind of easy. So 26 became 30 and 30 became 40 and 40 became 50 and then 55, 60. So I actually tried a few months later for a 70 turn spin. It was January of 2007, and it was the coldest day I could find. And I took my airplane up to 16,000 feet. Yeah, it was really funny. I got handed off to Memphis Center, and I told them what I was going to do. And I'm in the middle of this, I'm through turn 35 or something. And they're giving you traffic information. So Memphis Center says something like, 73905 Lima, you've got traffic 2 o'clock. I thought, well, what's 2 o'clock? So anyway, but it self-recovered after about 35 turns. I had lost so much fuel. It took me an hour to get to 16,000 feet. I'd lost so much fuel getting up there that what happened is the engine quit, the prop came to a stop. And remember, we talked about earlier the fact that when you close the throttle, what happens? Your nose pitches down and the plane self-recovered. I tried it the next day, and I had to borrow oxygen for this too, right? Because I was up at 16,000 feet. Anyway, I tried it the next day, self-recovered again, and I just gave up. So I can't get my plane high enough to get any more than 60.
And how high did you go to do the 60 turns?
I went to 14,000 feet.
Wow. It's interesting. So you said it's self-recovered. Is there no way to keep it into the spin if you wanted to?
Well, I was holding back all the way on the yoke. I was trying my hardest, but I just used enough fuel getting up to 16,000 feet. So once I've once the fuel is about below 18 gallons in the tanks, what ends up happening is the fuel in a spin unports to the outside of the tank, and it's unavailable at the pickup. So yeah, it took me so much time and fuel to get up to 16,000 feet that I couldn't force the engine to stay going. So
Interesting.
there you have it.
Now it sounds like sometimes when it self recovers, it's because the engine stopped. Is that the case all the time?
In Bill's plane, well, first of all, both platforms, if they're low enough, or the Cessna 152s, once you get below about 18 gallons of fuel, then it tends to quit after 13, 14, 15 turns. Our airplanes, interestingly, have an oscillatory spin mode. So while you're going around and around, the nose is pitching down and then up and down and up. So it could be that what I should have done is maybe loaded it with a little bit more of an aft CG. I'm not advocating an aft CG by any stretch or going too far, but I have a very forward CG in the airplane, especially when I'm by myself. So, if I were to do it again, I'd probably try to bring the CG back more toward the middle of the envelope, and that might help keep it in the spin as well.
Oh, good. So you're giving tips to people how they might beat your record. Is that right?
Oh, my record has been beaten by a number of turns. So I was thinking at one point it would be fun to see if somebody could give me a tow up to some crazy altitude where I could get my record back.
Got it. Well, maybe you need to get the record in gliders, for example.
Maybe I could do that. Yeah.
Well, speaking of different categories of aircraft, let's talk about spins and multi-engine aircraft. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, not a good mix.
So why is that a bad thing?
Well, it's interesting. If you look at really old aircraft like Piper Cubs and such, they're very they have light wings. They're very fuselage loaded. They have big tail feathers. Those airplanes are great spin recoverers. You can stop the rotation in one of those airplanes using the rudder. But as the mass distribution of the aircraft tends to go out more to the wings and to have maybe more of a neutral or wing heavy inertial loading, then the elevator tends to be primary for recovery. And what happens though is, the tail feathers in our airplanes, we don't want them to be big because then that causes a lot of drag and we can't go fast. So there's every motivation in the world to have tail feathers on an aircraft that, again, aren't particularly large, and they get their force because they're way back on we have a long fuselage, so that it gets a good moment even if the force isn't that big. So anyway, as the weight goes out into the wings, they tend to be more elevator primary for recovery, but the characteristics, the mass characteristics are just horrible for spins. So if you were to get into a spin in a twin, which is often happens when you have an engine failure and you're getting roll and yaw into the bad engine. That's an airplane that really wants to get into a spin. And the spin characteristics are horrible for multi-engine aircraft. The FAA doesn't require during certification that they are spin tested because we know they have bad spin characteristics. They tried to put on anti-spin devices like a ventral fin. You'll often see on twins a large ventral fin underneath the belly, strakes on the nose, things like that help for spin resistance. And then basically, cross your fingers. If you lose an engine in a multi-engine aircraft, that's why you want to pitch the blue line to make sure that you can maintain directional control. But spinning in a multi-engine aircraft is a terrible idea.
Well, and you certainly don't want to end up spinning on your base to final turn there, because you've got a huge turn radius and a faster twin, and that would be a disaster. Of course, any spin at that low of an altitude is probably going to be a disaster. Hey, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about landings. You wrote an article a while ago about PIO. Tell folks what that's all about and what you can tell us about it.
So sure, a PIO is a pilot-induced oscillation, and you'll see that the typical scenario for a PIO on landing is coming in with a little bit too much energy, and I think we've all probably done it. Maybe the conditions are gusty, and if adding 5 knots is a good idea, well, 10 or 15 must be better. So people will come in a little too fast. And then what happens when you try to flare, of course, is that you balloon. And now you're looking at a bunch of sky. You're not too far from the runway. So, the pilot tries to help and maybe pushes forward. And the idea is that you've just excited basically a phugoid oscillation. And most of the airplanes that you and I fly tend to have stable phugoid oscillations. So the fact is, the plane all on its own is going to try to seek that lower nose, and by pushing it when the nose is high, people will often exacerbate the situation and make it go past the position where it should be and then too low. Now you're looking at a bunch of ground. People want to pull, so it's easy to get out of phase with the aircraft. And the real solution to getting into a PIO is to freeze the controls. If you freeze the controls, you can rely on the stability of the aircraft to make those oscillations settle down. And what you should do then is just power up, gear up, take it around, and come in again for a landing with maybe a little more responsible airspeed. But unfortunately, people try to they try to help out as much as they can, and the pilot ends up hurting the situation. It usually doesn't end up in big injuries or fatalities, but for the pilot, but for the aircraft, it's devastating.
Yeah. Yet another case that we've just talked about where it makes sense to go around.
Yes.
Yeah. There are just so many things that can be solved by the go around. And I think people somehow must think it's a sign of failure that, I can't save this landing. It's like, no, people, look at it as an extra 5 minutes of flying you get to log.
Exactly. Yeah. I have no problem doing a go around.
Yeah. It's a good thing to practice from time to time as well, too. So I know you have so many different things going on in your life, professor, author, speaker, flight instructor. What's on the horizon for you? What kinds of things are you thinking, boy, when I get time, this is what I really want to do?
Oh, you know what I want to do? So a number of years ago, I added glider privileges to my commercial certificate. I'd like to get my glider instructor certificate. I try to get certificates and ratings instead of doing a flight review, because I feel like if I'm learning something, then that's going to be better than going out with an instructor every couple of years. It's the only reason I have my ATP. It's the only reason I have probably a glider certificate. It's probably the only reason I have a seaplane rating. It's just fun to learn new things. So I think it's going to be my glider instructor certificate. And I have to say that I'm amazed the great stuff you learn when you're going for a glider certificate. When every one of your landings is an engine out, how could that not be the best training ever? So I'm always bullish on people going for a glider certificate or rating. So
that sounds like awesome advice. Yeah. Well, you are the 2020 National Certificated Flight Instructor of the Year. Do you have any tips or suggestions for other flight instructors out there, things that you think are keys to success to being a flight instructor?
What I think is one of the most important parts of instruction is ground instruction. And, I'm a big bookworm myself. I love reading about aviation when I'm not actually in an aircraft. And what I try to do, I realize that for a lot of people, they want to get in the airplane and go. But when I give instruction, I view the everything that we do on the ground is as important as what we do in the airplane, and then vice versa. So those two complement each other. So I'd suggest, or I'd encourage flight instructors to really pay attention to the ground briefings that they give. One of the reasons I generate so many videos is I try to make ground instruction exciting, and I try to make it interesting. I always send people a book ahead of time, and people will ask me, well, okay, how much should I read this book? And I usually say, you know what, some people read it 5 times and they can recite it from memory. Some people look at the pictures. Anything you can do in between there makes what we do more of a conversation. And I am very big on ground instruction being a conversation instead of me blathering. My long tenure as a math professor has taught me that folks have a limited ability to listen to technical sorts of things. So again, I try to make it interesting and exciting, and I try to put the ground instruction in between the flights so people have that chance to have the aha moments. So I'd encourage people to pay attention to the ground instruction.
Got it. And for people that are thinking about becoming flight instructors, any tips on how you would suggest they would prepare so that they could someday join us in this fun profession that you and I enjoy so much?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I never thought about being a flight instructor. I got a late start in flying. I was 34 when I took my first flying lesson. And it just spoke to me. I saw all of the math in it, and I was absolutely in love. And then I got my instrument rating because I wanted to travel, and it's safer if you're instrument rated. And then, well, gosh, I can up my skills being a commercial pilot. So I got my commercial certificate. And then somebody suggested to me, well, gosh, you've come this far. Why don't you become a flight instructor? And that was the best thing that I've done, because I'll tell you, I am forever a student of aviation. And to me, there's not a week that goes by that I don't learn something about aviation. And to me, that's really exciting. And the idea that you can transfer that, you can share aviation with other people. I mean, flight instructors, we're the ambassadors for aviation. So we have the power to help people see that, done safely, it's exciting, it's useful, it's fun. And I can't speak more highly about earning a flight instructor certificate. It just means that you're always learning. And I learn from my students all the time. To me, that's really exciting. My students range from, as I said before, student pilots, and I've flown with military pilots and airline pilots, and I've even flown with flight test pilots. I had some people from Embraer take from Brazil, take spins and aerobatics from me. And I learned as much from them in ground school, in my ground school with them, as they did from me. So I just, that's a long-winded way of saying, I would encourage everybody who has that kind of interest in aviation and who wants to serve in that capacity as an ambassador. It's just an invitation to continually learn.
Good. Hopefully someone who's listening right now kind of thinks, maybe I should become a flight instructor. Interestingly, you and I are both accidental flight instructors, because I too hadn't given it a thought until someone said, you should get your CFI. And I thought, that's a good idea. So I'm curious, for folks that might want to come and fly with you, and they're not concerned that you'll say, watch this. What kinds of training do you offer at your flight school for people that might be coming into Tennessee to fly with you?
Sure. So the two main courses that I offer is I offer a one-day course on spins and aerobatics, and that can result in a CFI spin sign-off if somebody is working toward a flight instructor certificate. But sometimes, again, it's just a student pilot who wants to feel more confident. So that's usually a day. And then I teach an aerobatics course in the Cessna that is 2 days. and it includes a healthy dose of spins, because if you're going to be doing aerobatics, it's easy to get into a spin. So we need to do some spins and spin recoveries. And also, a spin is one of the 3 basic aerobatic maneuvers: a spin, loop, and a roll. So in my aerobatic course, we certainly do the basics, and then we do some combination maneuvers that you might see at air shows, things like cloverleafs and Cuban 8s and Immelmans and such. But my aerobatic course is really an emergency maneuver course on, in disguise, so to speak. So I end up doing, interestingly, some aerobatics on instruments, so that you can see what your instruments are doing when a plane is in, crazy attitude. And we do roll-up sets and things like that. And then we finish with what is most important to my student. For example, if somebody is going for a CFI spin sign-off, then I usually give a spin-heavy version of aerobatics. Some people really like the loop and roll maneuvers, and we make up a little air show at the end. Some people really want a heavy dose of the emergency maneuver training, and so we do that. So within that aerobatic course, it's actually a number of different courses. Virtually everything I do is one-on-one, so it's just completely tailored to the person with whom I'm flying.
Got it. And so where would people find out more about you and the ACE Aerobatic School?
Sure. Well, my website is aceaerobaticschool.com. And so you can get information there, and my contact information is there as well.
Catherine, thank you so very much. It's been a delight talking with you again today.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Max. Thanks so much for having me.